The storm came without warning. By dusk, the prairie sky had folded into charcoal, thick clouds rolling low over Broken Willow Ranch. Wind tore across the fields, bending tall grass into frantic waves. Thunder followed in heavy cracks, shaking shutters and rattling the small timber cabin like a challenge. Inside, firelight painted the walls in gold and shadow. Selena Booker stood near the hearth, her full, graceful figure outlined by flame. Her dark skin glowed warm in the flicker, her thick curls gathered loosely at her nape, though strands had slipped free and brushed her cheeks. The ride-in had soaked the hem of her skirt, and now the damp fabric clung to her calves as heat from the fire slowly dried it. She had only meant to check on Elias Jr. after his tumble from the loft. The boy slept safely in the back room now, breathing steady, stitched and bandaged with her careful hands. She had meant to leave before nightfall, but the storm had trapped her. The cabin door pushed open with a hard gust. Jonah Callahan stepped inside. He filled the doorway like something carved from the earth itself, tall, broad-shouldered, rain streaming from his coat and dark hair. The lantern light caught along his jaw, along the powerful lines of his chest beneath his soaked shirt. Water pooled at his boots as he shut the door against the wind. For a long moment, neither spoke. The air between them felt charged, thick as the clouds overhead. "The road's awash near the mud," he said at last, voice low and steady despite the thunder outside. "You're not riding anywhere tonight." Selena lifted her chin slightly. "I reckoned as much." He shrugged off his coat, revealing the damp fabric stretched over muscle earned from years of work. He was a giant of a man, not only in height, but in presence. Even standing still, he seemed to occupy more room than any room allowed. She was not small. Her curves were generous, proud, strong from labor and long hours tending the sick. Yet beside him, she felt enveloped, not diminished, just held within something vast. Another crash of thunder shook the rafters. Jonah moved closer to the fire, close enough that heat began to steam from his shirt, close enough that the scent of rain and leather wrapped around her senses. "You stayed," he said quietly. "I wasn't leaving your boy alone." "That's not what I meant." Her breath caught slightly. He took another step. Now the distance between them was no more than a breath's width. She could see the faint scar along his temple, the fine lines carved by grief at the corners of his eyes. Those gray eyes, usually guarded as stone, held something unshielded tonight. The storm howled outside, but inside the cabin, the silence deepened. "You've been keeping space between us," Selena murmured. Selena's fingers tightened around the edge of the mantel. "And you've been noticing." "Hard not to." Lightning flashed through the small window, illuminating them in stark white for a heartbeat. Dark skin, bronzed skin, flame between them. Jonah lifted his hand. Large, rough, scarred from rope burns and long winters. He did not touch her. Not yet. "Selena," he said, voice dropping lower, roughened by something deeper than weather. "You think I don't feel it? Every time you walk away too quick, every time your eyes hold mine a second too long." Her pulse thudded hard in her ears. "I admit it," she admitted softly. The admission shifted something. He closed the last inch between them, his hand settling at her waist, firm but careful, as though he feared she might shatter if he gripped too tight. She did not pull away. Thunder rolled like distant drums. His head lowered slightly, his breath warm against her temple. "Your body is mine tonight," the giant cowboy whispered. The words might have sounded like possession from another man, but from him they trembled. Not command, confession, need. Her heart leapt, not in fear, but in recognition. The hunger in his voice was matched by the fire rising in her own chest. She had denied it for months,
told herself it was loneliness, told herself it was proximity. But this was choice. She turned her face towards his, eyes dark and steady. "And what makes you think that I don't want to be?" she replied, voice warm as the fire behind her. That question dissolved the last restraint between them. His breath left him in a low, unguarded sound. His other hand came to her waist, firm but careful, as though he feared she might shatter if he gripped too tight. She did not pull away. Thunder rolled like distant drums. His head lowered slightly, his breath warm against her temple. "Ah, sure?" he asked, barely audible over the storm. "Yes." Clear, certain. He kissed her then, not in haste, not in violence, but in hunger long held at bay. His mouth claimed hers with restrained intensity, as though he had imagined this moment 100 times and feared waking from it. Her hands rose instinctively, fingers curling into the fabric of his shirt, feeling the power beneath. The storm outside battered the cabin. Inside, another storm found release. He lifted her slightly, effortless in his arms, and she let out a soft breath of surprised laughter before the sound melted into another kiss. He carried her towards the sturdy wooden table near the fire, setting her down with reverence rather than urgency. His forehead rested against hers. "I won't take what you don't give," he said, thick. She cupped his jaw. "I'm not something to take. I'm something to choose." His gray eyes searched her face, then softened. "I choose you." Lightning cracked again, illuminating them in gold and shadow. And as rain hammered the roof and wind tore at the shutters, Selena knew this was no fleeting blaze born of storm or loneliness. This was two wounded souls stepping forward at the same time, not conquered, not claimed, chosen. And tonight, under thunder and flame, they both surrendered, not to possession, but to each other.
Morning did not arrive with thunder. It crept softly across Broken Willow Ranch, pale sunlight filtering through damp clouds, washing the prairie in silver and gold. The storm had passed in the night, leaving the earth dark and rich, the air cool with promise. Inside the cabin, the fire had burned low to embers. Selena Booker stirred first. She lay beneath a thin quilt near the hearth, the scent of smoke and rain lingering in the air. For a brief moment she did not move, listening to the quiet. No wind screaming through cracks, no shutters rattling, only the steady rhythm of breathing beside her. Jonah Callahan slept on his back, one powerful arm draped loosely across her waist. Even in rest, he seemed larger than the space allowed, broad chest rising and falling in slow, deep breaths. Without the guarded hardness that usually marked his face, he looked almost boyish, lines eased, jaw slackened from sleep. Selena watched him. The night before had been heat and closeness and truth spoken without disguise. Yet morning carried weight of its own. Storms could blur judgment. Dawn had a way of sharpening it again. Carefully, she slipped from beneath his arm. Bare feet touched cool wood as she wrapped a shawl around her shoulders and moved toward the small window. Outside, dew clung to fence rails. A meadowlark tested its song. The prairie stretched wide and endless, washed clean. Behind her, Jonah shifted. "You're quiet," he murmured, voice rough with sleep. She did not turn immediately. Morning does that to a body. He sat up slowly, running his hand through his dark hair. The blanket pooled at his waist, revealing shoulders marked by labor and years beneath harsh sun. He watched her silhouette in the light. "Regret?" he asked. The word hung between them, heavy, honest. Selena turned then. No. The answer came without hesitation. But there was something else in her eyes, thoughtfulness, caution.
Jonah rose and crossed the space between them in 3 long strides. He did not crowd her. He simply stood close enough that she could feel his warmth. "What is it, then?" he asked quietly. She drew a slow breath. "Storms make things feel certain. Morning asks if they still are." His gray eyes softened. "You think what happened was just weather?" She met his gaze fully now. "I think loneliness can sound like love in the dark." The words did not wound him. They settled instead, honest and steady. Jonah reached for her hand, not gripping, not pulling, just holding. "I didn't speak from loneliness. I spoke from knowing." She searched his face, looking for hesitation, for shadow of the past, for ghost of the wife he had buried years ago. "What do you know?" she asked. "That when you walk into a room, it steadies. That my boy laughs different when you're near. That I breathe easier." He paused, thumb brushing gently over her knuckles. "And that last night wasn't about taking anything. It was about choosing." Her shoulders eased slightly. "Choosing," she echoed. He nodded. "You're not mine because I claimed you. You're mine only if you stand here and say you want to be." Silence lingered. From the back room came the faint rustle of Elias Jr. stirring in his bed. Selena glanced toward the sound. "Your son," she said softly. Jonah's gaze followed hers. "My son." Then, after a breath, "If you'll have it, ours." The word did not rush her. It settled like a stone dropped into water, rippling outward. She had spent years building herself into independence, into resilience. She had survived whispered judgments, long nights tending strangers, and the quiet ache of coming home alone. Belonging frightened her more than solitude ever had. She turned back to Jonah. "I won't lose myself," she said firmly. His jaw tightened slightly, not in anger, but in understanding. "I won't," he replied. "Not with me." "How can you be sure?" "Because I don't want to shrink you." His voice roughened faintly. "I want to stand beside you." The simplicity of it disarmed her. Outside, the cabin door creaked as wind shifted gently through the yard. Elias Jr.'s small footsteps padded down the hallway, hesitant at first. Selena's heart softened at the sound. Jonah released her hand and stepped toward the doorway just as the boy appeared, hair tousled, bandage still neat across his brow. "Morning, Papa," he murmured. Jonah crouched to his son's height. "Morning, Tree." The boy's eyes flickered toward Selena. A shy smile tugged at his mouth. "Safe lady stayed?" he asked quietly. Selena knelt beside them. "Yes," she answered gently. "I stayed." The boy leaned into her without hesitation, thin arms wrapping around her waist. She returned the embrace naturally, instinctively, as though she had been doing so for years. Jonah watched the scene unfold. No storm, no thunder, just morning light catching on dark curls and sun-browned skin. Selena looked up at him over the boy's shoulder. Something unspoken passed between them, something steadier than the fire of the night before. Not fever, not impulse, but choice. "I'm not promising forever today," she said softly. Jonah nodded once. "I'm not asking for it." The boy shifted between them, small hands gripping both their clothes as if afraid they might drift apart. Selena smiled faintly. "Let's begin with breakfast," she said. Jonah's lips curved at the edges. "That I can do." As he rose to stoke the fire anew now, morning light filled the cabin fully, washing away the shadows left by the storm. And though uncertainty still lingered in Selena's chest, it no longer felt like fear. It felt like the careful first step into something that could last if tended gently. Outside, the prairie stretched wide and patient. Inside, 3 figures moved quietly around a small kitchen table. Not yet a family, but no longer strangers to hope.
By Sunday, the prairie had dried. Wind carried only dust and the faint scent of cut hay as wagons rolled toward town for service and trade. Broken Willow Ranch looked unchanged from the outside, fences mended, cattle grazing, smoke rising from the chimney. But something inside had shifted. Selena Booker rode beside Jonah Callahan on the narrow road that led into Copper Creek. She sat tall in the saddle, her deep blue dress fitted neatly beneath her riding coat, her thick curls pinned high at her nape. She did not dress to impress the town. She dressed to remind herself who she was. Jonah rode slightly ahead, massive shoulders squared, hat pulled low against the sun. Even on horseback he looked enormous, like the land itself it shaped him. Yet his pace matched hers, never rushing beyond reach. They had not spoken much on the ride in. Words were unnecessary. The storm night lingered between them, not in embarrassment, not in secrecy, but in awareness. As the church steeple came into view, Selena felt the first prickle of watching eyes. Whispers traveled faster than wind in small towns. They dismounted near the hitching posts. Jonah stepped down first, then turned to offer his hand. She accepted it, steady and unhurried. His grip was firm but not possessive, guiding her safely to the ground. Across the street, two women paused mid-conversation. Margaret Tarley stood among them. Her gaze was sharp, assessing, lips pressed thin beneath a stiff hat brim. She said nothing, but her silence carried commentary enough. Selena straightened her spine. Jonah noticed. Without a word, he reached for her hand again, not dramatic, not theatrical, just open and visible. His large fingers laced through hers naturally, as though it had always been so. Conversation around them dimmed. Inside the church, sunlight streamed through plain glass windows, painting pale rectangles across wooden pews. Families filled rows, hats removed, voices lowered. When Selena entered beside Jonah, a subtle hush followed. Not loud, not overt, but present. She felt it brush across her shoulders like cold air. Jonah guided her to a pew near the center. He did not sit in the back to avoid attention. He did not place her at a distance. He sat beside her, shoulder to shoulder. The preacher's voice began its sermon, steady and rhythmic. Words about grace, about humility, about storms that test faith. Selena listened, but her awareness remained half-turned toward the room. 2 rows ahead, Margaret leaned to another woman and whispered something behind a gloved hand. Jonah's jaw tightened. Selena felt it. Her fingers squeezed his lightly beneath the pew, a silent warning. Do not fight this for me. He inhaled slowly through his nose. After service ended, congregants gathered outside beneath bright noon sun, handshakes, polite nods, children darting between skirts. Margaret approached first. "Jonah," she said crisply, "good to see you out and about." "Margaret," he replied evenly. Her gaze shifted to Selena. "Miss Booker," she added after a pause, tone polite but edged. Selena inclined her head. "Mrs. Tarley." A small circle formed naturally around them, townsfolk pretending not to linger. Margaret folded her hands neatly. "We heard you stayed at the ranch during the storm." The statement held no question mark. Jonah's shoulders squared slightly. "Yes," he answered. Her brows lifted slightly. "Overnight?" "Yes." Silence stretched. Selena felt the weight of judgment pressing from all sides. She could let Jonah speak. He would defend her without hesitation, but that would make her something to be defended. Instead, she stepped forward half a pace. "The roads were unsafe," she said calmly. "Your husband can attest to the flooding near the creek." Margaret blinked slightly, thrown off by the directness. "My son was injured. I did my duty. I stayed until morning." Her tone held no apology, no challenge, just fact.
Jonah watched her carefully. Pride flickered in his gray eyes, but he remained silent, letting her words stand. Margaret's lips thinned. Of course, appearances can be complicated. Selena met her gaze fully now. Only when people choose to complicate them, she replied. The circle tightened slightly. Someone coughed. Another pretended to adjust a hat. Margaret's chin lifted. Small towns remember things. Selena's expression did not shift. "So do I," she said gently. The quiet strength in her voice unsettled more than anger would have. Margaret stepped back first. "Well," she said stiffly, "good day." As she turned away, whispers resumed, but softer now. Jonah exhaled slowly. "You didn't need to carry that alone," he murmured. She looked up at him. "I wasn't alone." He studied her face, not shrinking, not flinching, standing. He took her hand again, not in protection this time, but in partnership. Across the yard, Elias Jr. ran toward them, small boots kicking dust, grin wide. "Papa, safe lady," he called. The boy reached them breathless, slipping his small hand into Selena's free one without hesitation. Some of the watching eyes softened at the sight. Children had a way of stripping away adult cruelty. Jonah looked down at their joined hands, his large one, hers steady and strong, the boy's small fingers anchoring them together. "This town will talk," he quietly said. Selena nodded. "Let them." He leaned slightly closer, voice low enough for only her to hear. "Tonight," he murmured, "I'll remind you that their whispers don't own us." A faint smile curved her lips. "And how will you do that?" His eyes darkened, not in aggression, but with quiet certainty. "By standing beside you in daylight." The simplicity of it stole her breath more than any storm-born whisper. They worked back toward their horses together, 3 figures moving across sunlit dust. Behind them, conversation resumed, but something had changed. The whispers were no longer sharp with scandal. They were edged with curiosity, and perhaps respect.
The prairie evenings settled in slow and golden, sunlight stretching long across Broken Willow Ranch before dipping behind the low hills. Crickets began their steady hum. Cattle moved lazily in the distance. The storm from days before felt like a memory carried off by wind. Inside the cabin, warmth gathered not from weather, but from routine. Selena Booker stood at the small wooden table, sleeves rolled neatly to her elbows as she kneaded dough for cornbread. Flour dusted her dark hands and brushed lightly across the curve of her cheek where she had absent-mindedly wiped sweat. The simple domestic rhythm steadied her breathing. Across the room, Jonah Callahan repaired a broken bridle strap, thick fingers working leather with patient precision. Even seated, he seemed larger than the space allowed. Firelight traced the powerful slope of his shoulders and caught silver threads just beginning to show near his temples. Elias Jr. sat cross-legged on the floor between them, carefully carving notches into a scrap of wood, tongue peeking slightly from the corner of his mouth in concentration. There was no thunder tonight, no rush of passion threatening to outrun sense, only quiet. Selena slid the pan into the oven and brushed her palms together. She glanced up and found Jonah already watching her. He did not look away this time. "What?" she asked, lifting one brow. He shook his head faintly. "Just memorizing." "Memorizing what?" "The way you move in this house like you've always belonged." Her hand stilled slightly against the edge of the table. Belonging. It was a word she had guarded against for years. "I haven't always," she replied. Jonah set the bridle aside and rose slowly to his full height. The cabin felt smaller when he stood. He crossed toward her with deliberate ease, stopping just within reach. "You don't need permission to take space here," he said quietly. She searched his face. "I don't want to take anything that isn't freely given." His jaw tightened gently, not in frustration, but in emphasis. Then hear me plain. I give it. The fire popped behind them. From the floor, Elias looked up. Give what? Selena smiled faintly and crouched to smooth the boy's hair. Your papa's being serious again. The boy grinned. He's bad at jokes. You heard that? Laughter loosened the air. When supper was finished and Elias tucked into bed, the house quieted again. The moon rose pale outside the window, spilling silver light over the floorboards. Jonah stepped onto the porch, resting his forearms against the railing. The night was cool, breeze soft against his skin. Moments later, Selena joined him, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders. They stood side by side, without speaking at first. You were strong in town, he said finally. I was steady, she corrected. He glanced down at her. Same thing. She shook her head gently. Strength is loud, steady is quieter. And you prefer quiet? She considered that. I prefer choosing when to be heard. Jonah nodded once, absorbing that. Silence stretched comfortably between them now. The earlier tension of scrutiny and gossip had faded. What remained was something steadier. He turned toward her fully. I meant what I said the other night, he began. She looked up at him. Which part? He stepped closer, his large frame blocking the wind. The part where I told you your body was mine tonight. Her breath shifted slightly. And? She asked. He lowered his voice, not possessive, not demanding, just honest. I didn't mean ownership. I meant trust. I meant I felt you choosing me back. Her gaze softened. And if I hadn't, I would have stepped away. The simplicity of that answer unraveled the last thread of doubt inside her. He lifted a hand slowly, brushing his thumb along her jaw. His touch was warm, deliberate. You are not something to conquer. You're something to stand with. She rested her palm against his chest, feeling the steady rhythm beneath. And you, she said quietly, are not something to hide behind. A small smile tugged at his mouth. The prairie wind stirred her curls. Your body is mine tonight, he whispered again. But this time the words carried different weight. They were not storm-born. They were calm. She stepped into him willingly. And mine? She asked softly. His breath warmed her ear. Yours, he answered without hesitation. He bent and kissed her, not fierce, not desperate, slow, certain. His hands moved along her back with reverence rather than hunger. She leaned into him, fingers curling lightly into his shirt. The moonlight caught their silhouettes, dark and bronze blending in quiet harmony. No thunder cracked, no lightning flashed, only the steady hum of crickets and distant cattle. When he drew back, he rested his forehead against hers. We build this slow, he said. Yes, she agreed. Not from storms, from mornings, she added. His arms tightened her gently. Inside the cabin, the embers glowed low but steady. Not wildfire, not blaze, just warmth that lingered. And as the night deepened, Selena felt something settle fully into place. Not passion alone, not even desire, but trust. The giant cowboy did not tower over her. He stood beside her. And this time, when he whispered against her skin, the words were not claim, they were covenant.
Autumn arrived without announcement. The prairie grasses shifted from green to amber almost overnight, rolling like waves of gold beneath a high blue sky. Broken Willow Ranch moved with the season. Cattle gathered closer to pasture, fences reinforced, wood stacked high along the cabin wall. Inside the house, change lingered too. Selena Booker stood at the wide basin near the window, sleeves rolled as she rinsed apples Elias Jr. had proudly gathered from the small orchard near the creek. Her reflection in the glass caught her attention for a moment. Strong shoulders, soft curves, steady eyes. She did not look like a woman passing through. She looked rooted. Behind her, Jonah Callahan carried in a heavy sack of feed as though it weighed nothing. He set it down near the pantry and paused, watching her the way he often did now, not as if surprised she was there, but as if grateful. "Winter won't catch us unready," he said. "It won't," she agreed, glancing over her shoulder. Their eyes met, and something quiet passed between them. Not urgency, not fire, certainty. Elias burst through the door moments later, cheeks flushed from the cool air. "Papa, I fixed the loose board by the fence," he announced. Jonah crouched to inspect the boy's scraped knuckles. "Did you hammer straight?" "Yes, sir." "Then you did well." Selena dried her hands and knelt beside them. "Show me after supper," she said warmly. The boy grinned wide. "You're staying for winter, right?" The question was simple, but it carried weight. Jonah's gaze lifted slowly to Selena's face. He did not speak. He would not answer for her. Selena felt the truth rising inside her, not from pressure, not from obligation, but from choice made daily, quietly, without spectacle. She reached for Elias's small hand. "Yes," she said gently, "I'm staying." The boy threw his arms around her without hesitation. Jonah stood slowly, breath steady, but eyes darker than usual. When Elias ran off again, humming to himself, silence settled between the adults. "You don't have to say it just because he hopes it," Jonah murmured. "I didn't," she replied. He searched her face carefully. "Then why?" She stepped closer to him, boots brushing against his. "Because leaving would feel like tearing out something that's grown strong." His jaw flexed slightly. "And staying? Feels like building." Wind rattled the shutters faintly, but inside the cabin the air was calm. Jonah reached up and brushed a curl from her cheek. His touch was slower now than it had been weeks ago, more mindful, as if each movement carried meaning. "You sure about tying yourself to a stubborn rancher?" he asked softly. She smiled faintly. "Only if he's sure about tying himself to a woman who won't bend small." He huffed a quiet laugh. "I don't want you small." "I know." That was the difference now. She knew. He pulled her into him, not sudden, not heated, just solid. His arms wrapped around her back, palms resting securely against her waist. She fit against him like something intentional, not fragile, not temporary, intentional. Outside, dusk settled across the fields. The sky deepened to violet, stars beginning to prick through. "I've been thinking," Jonah said against her hair. "That's dangerous," she teased lightly. "About asking you something." Her body stilled slightly, but she did not pull away. "What?" He leaned back enough to see her face. "Not tonight," he said. "Not rushed." Her heartbeat slowed. "Then when?" "When it feels like a promise we're already living." The answer steadied her more than any grand declaration could. They were not racing toward vows to quiet gossip. They were living the shape of one. Later that night, after Elias slept and the dishes were cleared, they sat together at the small table. A lantern burned low between them. Jonah reached across and took her hand. "I don't want you here because you saved us from a storm," he said quietly, "or because town watches, or because my son's attached." She squeezed his fingers gently. "I'm here," she replied, "because when I wake beside you, I don't feel smaller, I feel stronger." His eyes held hers steadily. "And when you stand beside me in daylight, I feel proud." No thunder followed, no dramatic swell, just truth settling like evening dew. He stood and offered her hand. "Come outside," he said. They stepped onto the porch together. The prairie stretched wide and endless beneath a sky heavy with stars. Cool air brushed her skin. Jonah moved behind her, large hands resting lightly at her hips, not claiming, not restraining, just present. "This land's harsh," he murmured. "It tests what stands on it." She leaned back against his chest. Then we'll stand firm." He pressed a slow kiss to her temple. "And if storms come again," she tilted her face upward toward the sky, "we won't hide from them." His arms tightened slightly. They did not need vows shouted across fields. They did not need approval from pews. They had already chosen. The fire that began in storm had not burned out. It had settled into something deeper. And as the prairie wind moved softly around them, Jonah Callahan and Selena Booker stood together, not because they were swept by weather, but because they had built something strong enough to stay.